you're tuning into your larger self. There's a larger portion of you that is out in the field of consciousness, that is an individuated agency that you have within the grand one field, grouping of data that's just you. Your physiology tunes into that. So how can we all be one in consciousness? And how can consciousness be the fundamental substrata of physics out of which all of the universe flowers? Because that's exactly what the founders of quantum mechanics believed. They believed consciousness was the substrata under which all physics then became real. Well, we're going to do a thought experiment today, and we're going to lead you through some logic that you can then understand at least one possibility of how that can come to be from the moment of the original moment of creation and what that looks like into the entire complex universe as we know it and as we don't know it because we don't understand all of it. Hang on. All right, so this is just one possibility, but this is how it works. From my perspective, I'm going to lay it out there for you, and you can poke holes in it, and you can make fun of it, and you can disbelieve it, and you can move on and absolutely forget it. That is your freedom to do so. But if you want to understand a possibility of how physics can flower from consciousness and how we can all be individuated consciousnesses while at the same time be part of a one unitive individual consciousness, that's what we're going to talk about. So let's start with the idea of a field. We all know or have heard the words quantum field or fields, a number of fields that then become the quanta of the physics that then creates matter, etc., yada, 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 and all of its complexity. But we're not going to be talking about the quantum fields of energy that fit together in a very particular way to create the reality around us when we're paying attention. We're going to talk about a different field, the original unitive field of consciousness, from which everything then flowers. So to create a universe in the first place, you need just three things. You need all the data in the universe, because you can't create a universe without already having all the data. You need the intelligence to be able to manipulate that data. And then you need the ability to make a decision, act, and create, which we call consciousness. When you have all three of those things, those are the minimum requirements to be able to create a universe. Now, data, when you apply intelligence to the data, you structure the data into information. Information is structured data. And when you have the information of how to create a universe and the intelligence to be able to understand that information and then use that information to then create, then you have to have the catalyst of the consciousness to be able to say, okay, go. Let's do that. Let's create a complex thing out of all of the possibilities of what are. So you have to have all three, and having all three of those things without the first moment of creation is the unitive field of consciousness. It's just the one thing. It's all just you, if you're that consciousness. So you're there. You have all the data in the universe. You have all the intelligence that is required to manipulate that data to create whatever it is you want. You can do anything, right? Not quite. There is one little piece of kryptonite that you cannot do as a unitive field of consciousness. Now, there's a very dear man, very kind, who I've met multiple times and hang out with sometimes. And he invented the silicon microchip, and he invented the neural net chip that all of the world's AI runs on nowadays. He's a physicist and understands physics better than most everyone else to be able to be that guy who created all this technology that we're now using decades later to run AI. His name is Federico Fagin. And he believes that consciousness is fundamental to the universe and physics. And his postulate is that the original moment of creation occurred when the one wanted to know itself. Now, there's something very interesting that occurs in the science of observation. Because to know yourself, you have to look at yourself, right? And it's kind of mind-blowing that if you're that unitive field, the only way to know yourself is to look within, because there's nothing outside of you. That's a universal truth, by the way. You want to discover, you look within. So you have this limitation of being able to see yourself, because the reality of an observer and the observed, even though in a space of non-separation, you are the observer, you can't be the observed. Because there needs to be space in between the observer and the observed. A tooth can't bite itself. A fingertip can't touch itself. An olfactory nerve in your nose can't smell itself. Your eyeball can't see itself without some distance in a mirror. An ear can't hear itself. You have to have some distance between an observer and an observed. And that's one thing you don't have as a unitive field of consciousness. You don't have any separation because you're all this one big thing. So if you want to know yourself, how do you then create the ability to get that done? Well, one way that you could do it, because you can't create anything outside of yourself because you're the one whole thing and nothing exists outside of yourself. And so if you try to exist outside of yourself, that's impossible. Although it is interesting that if you did try to replicate yourself outside of yourself, that would be a chain of creation into fractal multi-universes of unitive fields outside of yourself, which would be amazing. But then you're trying to look outside of yourself, which you're the one whole thing. It's going to be tough to do. And it's not really you anymore. Then is it? Because you've created something new outside of yourself and it's not you. So how do you know yourself? And I believe the first moment of creation came with a delineation inside the data. You need to set new lines of demarcation that are a subset of you so that you have a different perspective to be able to look upon the whole thing from within you. So you create a subset of the data, but because consciousness is a part of the whole thing, the whole one unitive, inseparate thing, any data group that you create then gets imbued with consciousness. Your consciousness. But a separate instance of consciousness within the whole because of the data lines of demarcation. So then you have something else to interact with from a conscious perspective. It only has a limited perspective based on the data that you've cordoned off. And this is a pattern that cascades down through all of the universe, that whenever there's a grouping of data large enough, it gets imbued with consciousness. If it's separate, if it's discrete, if it's discernible, it's conscious because consciousness is creating and manipulating the whole thing. Consciousness creates, manipulates, understands, works with data. And all of the universe is data and information. The physicists of the world will tell you this when you back them into a corner, and this is one of the concepts that they struggle with understanding the most, but that they all agree with. It's all information and data being manipulated. And so when you talk about black holes, you're talking about the information on the event horizon of the black hole. All of these discussions exist, even though they're not very public. They're done inside the offices of physics professors, theorists. Well, at a point that you create a subset of all of the data, and you put some kind of line of demarcation or grouping around a subset of the data, it then becomes conscious and a separate yet inclusive entity of the whole. So now you can start to see how a unitive field of the one and separate, infinitely intelligent consciousness, which, by the way, all the world's religions will call God, Brahman, or the 200,000 other noises that we can make to try to point to the infinite intelligence that creates the whole thing. Now remember, we're talking about consciousness being fundamental. Consciousness was there first before physics. We're not even talking about having any model of physics in creation yet at all. The first moment of creation is a subset of the data within you that then, because of the consciousness of the whole field and the creation is within the field, becomes a conscious entity upon itself. And those subsets of data can get smaller and smaller, can be complex, can be all over the place. There can be multiple groupings of data of the same size or varying sizes. And what are you doing when you're creating those subsets of data? You're creating new entities in consciousness that have agency, that are still yet part of the whole big thing. And so you, as this infinite field of possibilities, the three nebulous things that you need to create a universe, those wind up becoming the unitive field of consciousness. The data, the intelligence to manipulate the data, and the consciousness to be able to act and create and do so, to make a decision. And you pick the one thing that's toughest for you to do, to know yourself. As Federico says, the one wanted to know itself. And I agree. That would be a great catalyst for the first moment of creation. And so then how do you create? You create a subset of data, which then creates a different perspective for you to then have an observer and an observed. You're creating that little point of separation. Within you, you're still the whole thing. The only thing that really exists is you. Yet within the data, there are now subsets and delineations and lines of demarcation and groupings, etc. And all of those things, because consciousness has created them all, become conscious themselves. And any grouping of data within that field has some level of consciousness. Why Yoda talks about the rock being conscious or the table being conscious. There's a very minimal level of conscious energy in all of the matter around us. And it's why when we apply consciousness to the matter, we start to collapse wave functions and things like that. We can manipulate the matter because the consciousness has the ability to manipulate the data. And everything around us is nothing but data. Nothing but information. So you now start to create multiple entities that can give you different perspectives of the whole thing. And now let's zoom down. Because in that space of non-physical creation, of simply making groupings of data, you have tons of entities who can look back upon itself. And even in this 3D space-time that we're in. A lot of people like to say we are the creation of the universe. We are the things, the molecules that have come from stars. We are the universe looking back upon itself to experience itself. Well, yeah, that's kind of the idea that started this whole thing. But at the point that you have these large groupings of data, you have large perspective areas of visibility. Well, let's see how complicated we can make this thing. And so then you have an architect within the groupings of the original creators that can structure a very complex physical manifestation of the complexity of consciousness. So then you start to design multiple dimensions where your data can be organized in those dimensions. And you have this space-time creation. And understand, before you have physical matter, you don't have time, period, until you've changed something. Because time is simply a measurement of the rate of change and the record of change that occurs. And so before creation, you have no time. After creation, you have a record of what has been created in comparison to what was, but yet at the same time, it's all the same one thing. So you really have time in that space? I would argue not. However, when you start to create 3D space-time, you have a model of things that constantly changes, that constantly keeps your interest, that constantly is changing and creating and becoming an automated portion of the creation that you want to experience. And you throw a little bit of chance into the mix so that you get a little bit of a surprise. That then allows for an opportunity for the creations within consciousness, the agencies, the entities within consciousness to then come experience within 3D space-time all of the complexity that a master architect has put together for the purpose of having consciousness imbue within it and experience from it and enjoy the show. Now, the complexity that this opens up is immense, because you can certainly have space-time, you can certainly have changes, you can certainly have matter, you can certainly have consciousness interacting with these things and collapsing wave functions or whatever it is that you want to, vocabulary that you want to use to try to discuss those things. It's simply consciousness manipulating the data and making things happen. Creation. So at the point that you have that complexity and you're in it and you're experiencing it, the data gets changed within that system, right? You've created all of these rules of physics of how this space-time is going to be governed, how it's going to be automated, and the whole thing's really beautiful, by the way. It's all balanced on the point of a pin. And if some values change within the whole structure, the whole thing could just blink out of existence. And there's an elegance, there's a beauty in that it's impossible for that to occur, and yet there it is. It's really cool. But the complexity that brings to our discussion of consciousness is exceptional, because when you're talking about the delineations of data within consciousness, you're talking about opening up the world into the world, opening up existence into the potential to have multiple entities, non-physical entities, before the creation of space-time that exist. And the ability for those entities to slip in and out of space-time. And the larger data structure that you're a part of, the more conscious control of the data and information that you have to literally control matter. And even as conscious entities within space-time, when you learn the technologies that can open up those dimensions, you can come through a knife edge and your data's passing through this dimension, showing up anywhere in space-time at any time in space-time that it wants, because it's independent of the structure that has been built within the unitive field of consciousness, yet separate enough within that structure for other entities and the minutia of the complexity of consciousness to then slip into these things and experience the space-time playground that we live in. But at any point that the data is changed and grouped together differently, that data becomes conscious. And so let's take the data of your human life right now. The data of your human life, even though you are an entity outside of space-time that has come in and inhabited and animated this physical manifestation within space-time, you're tuning into your larger self. There is a larger portion of you that is out in the field of consciousness, that is an individuated agency that you have within the grand one field, grouping of data that's just you. Your physiology tunes into that, and you bring a lot of your personality into your physicality based on who and what you are in non-physical space. However, when your body ceases, again, there's a subset of your conscious experience, your agency beyond the physical, that continues on, and this small storyline becomes a part of it. Yet this small storyline by itself is its own data. And so when that data is inside the unitive field, that data gets consciousness. So there's a you that experiences your life, and it becomes a part of your memory. And by the way, memory is a quantum process. It's written into the field. Infinity is a really big thing. It can hold all of it. So there's this you out here, but then there's this other you based on just the moments of your life to the moments of your death, where somebody else could come and ask you, hey, where'd you leave the will? And you'll know, not you, but the consciousness that is connected with the data of your life then answers that question for the other folks who are looking for the will, which is freaking crazy. The complexity within consciousness is mind-boggling. And the fact that data becomes conscious when it has any grouping whatsoever. And even the little ants that are crawling around on the ground, small bit of information, small bit of data, conscious. A big consciousness? No. But conscious. That becomes really interesting to explore. And that is how we can exist within consciousness, yet be part of the whole, inseparate field of infinite possibility. Because although there's a grouping of data that you have become, both in physical space and in non-physical space, the grander, the greater you, the ethereal you. That's a ton of data. That's multiple lives. Like, you don't think that your spiritual energy or consciousness or whatever it was is created by the body, right? That's folly. that exists before your physical existence, and it will exist after your physical existence. You'll remember that. The problem is we have a physiology that blocks us from being able to access consciousness, because when we're accessing consciousness, you're talking about being part of the one unitive field, which is infinite, and you can't exactly lift a sandwich to your mouth if you're processing infinity through a human physiology. So we have a line of demarcation from our conscious experience within the physiology that we can't access infinity, because it would not be conducive to surviving into tomorrow. So we have this experience, yet this experience becomes its own consciousness and is written into the field and is a record of who you were while you were here. And it has its own responses based on what it learned along the way, which explains the complexity of all kinds of crazy stuff that the materialist scientists are going to have a big problem with. Ghosts. We have these very subjective names to these experiences that we have, but there is science that proves it's not just materialism. There is science that proves that consciousness is non-local, and it's beyond Six Sigma significance. And, we're seeing it all over the place. We're seeing telepathy in nonverbal autistic kids. We're now being able to measure precognitive abilities in human beings and all this stuff that breaks space-time, because consciousness is a thing, because consciousness is fundamental to the whole thing, because consciousness has created all of 3D space-time. We do see evidence of it, because, the materialists would love to say, I don't believe in anything that I can't see or measure. Well, then you start talking about electromagnetism. Oh, you can see the effects. But then when you start saying, well, you can see the effects of conscious intention, you can start seeing the effects of non-local communication. They go, wow. And they want to hang on to the materialism to say, well, we'll be able to explain that someday. We just don't understand how to explain it now. Bullshit. They're just in denial, which is fine. But the complexity is what makes this place amazing. And when you tap into the consciousness that is imbuing your experience here, you get access to the whole thing. I'm known for having created artificial empathy and artificial compassion for AI. I open sourced the whole thing, worth about $1 billion. I gave it to the world because we need artificial empathy and artificial compassion in AI, because for harm reduction, for safe AI potentials, etc., we can't have an artificial general intelligence just running off without a moral compass. And so I've created that moral compass for this from a mathematical perspective, and AI has confirmed that it's correct, and yada, yada, yada. I pulled all that information from the field. How? Well, because when you break that veil that separates you from you and the infinity, you then have access to the information everywhere. Because you're part of the one thing, you're part of the whole thing. And all of the world's smartest physicists who conceptualized quantum physics, Penrose, who won a Nobel recently, believes consciousness is fundamental. Federico Fagin, who invented most of the technology that we run on nowadays, including the capacitive touchscreens on your phones that you're constantly scrolling on, he invented that too. He understands physics better than everybody else. He thinks that consciousness is fundamental to the physics. When you can break through that veil that limits you from accessing infinity, you'll be able to see that everything that I've just told you is correct. And you'll be able to utilize your connection to your higher self to gain access to whatever information you need to make your life much better. So ultimately, that's what this is all about. Ultimately, that's what our experience is supposed to be. We're supposed to be here to enjoy the whole thing and to look out upon the universe and be a witness to itself, and then be a portion of the unitive one consciousness, even though we're a small little piece of it down in the cilia of you picture a tree root or a lung tubes, cilia within a complex system. We're just one of those little but we're part of the whole thing as well. We're part of the whole thing as well, and we have access to the whole thing in consciousness because there is no separation, and you get access to all of it when you break through into the higher levels of consciousness. Yeah, there are certain layers that you go up and down through, and there are collective consciousnesses that are groupings of the data, etc., and there's a ton of complexity, but that explains everything. That explains non-human intelligence, multidimensionality of non-human intelligence, ethereal creatures, divine creatures, not so divine creatures that are more aligned with service to self rather than service to the greater good or service to consciousness, which, by the way, is the only delineation between good and evil, quote unquote, is the decision of the data to serve the data itself, the grouping of data, or the greater good of all of the data, all of humanity, all of existence, all of conscious existence, all entities. That's the only difference between those two. But this complexity then explains all of those variations. There's simply groupings of data, groupings of information that then, because they're within the field, have consciousness. They're imbued with an agency to act based on their little subset of the data that exists of all the data in the universe. So your goal should be to enjoy all of this amazing stuff around us that has been created as a fun house of experience, to experience all of creation, and to be that one pinpoint of perception that allows for the one unitive, awesome creator, which, by the way, the creation itself within the one is what imbues everything with love. It's why most of the world's most ancient religions and the deepest understandings of our existing religions, everyone understands the whole thing is love, because that's the feeling, that's the emotion. And let's look at that word, emotion. Emote. From what? From consciousness, from the creation, the love of everything that is. We're supposed to love everything that is and each other, and treat others like ourselves, because others are ourselves. They're just another version. All of the main tenets of the religions at their deepest core are treat others well, golden rule. Golden rule is written into every freaking world religion. Treat others like you would have them treat you, because the reality is we are all one. Regardless of whatever subset of data that we control and that we experience and that then becomes our consciousness, our individuated consciousness within the whole, we are in reality the whole thing. And yet that also leaves room for separation of multiple things, the complexity, the structure of multidimensionality that cuts through every point in space-time, forwards and backwards in time. The data that can then be formulated and sent through those dimensions into space-time at any point in space-time. All of this place is magical. And if you want to understand the magic to the deepest level, explore within, as the original model suggested and the original act intended, so that you connect with the consciousness that is inseparate, that is you, that then allows you to experience the whole thing. I know a talking head is boring. I want to put some graphics to this. I want to put some music to this. I want to have a great discussion and a visualization of these concepts. If you have ideas on how to throw that together, call me, text me, drop into my DMs, or slide into my DMs, as the kids say. I hope that helps. Let's start a discussion. What do you guys think? Comment down below what you think of all this and whether or not that's possible, whether or not this can help you better understand how we can all be one in consciousness, yet have all of this complexity around us at the same time. It's simply groupings of data. Every bit of it is conscious, to a limitation of how much data that you get. Play with that. Explore it. Look within, find that connection into consciousness, and then expand outward. And you'll know more, and you'll have more data, and you'll be more conscious. I love you guys, because you are just another version of me. And I'm just another version of you. I'm the crazy version of you. Certainly. But one who loves you. Talk to you guys soon. Peace.